Hello and welcome. You're listening to ADHD Support Talk Radio. ADHD Support Talk is brought to you by addclasses.com. Visit addclasses.com for helpful online events and resources today. I'm your co-host, Lynne Edris, and I want to welcome you back. As most of you know, I am a productivity coach, so I help overwhelmed professionals take control of their days and get done what they want to get done with less effort so that they have more time and more energy for the things that matter most to them. You can learn more about me and what I do on my website. It's www.coachingadvantages.com. Today, I have with me my friend and colleague, Aron Croft, and we are going to talk about our favorite mutual topic, and that's productivity. So welcome, Aron. Welcome back to ADHD Support Talk. Tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Lynn, thank you so much. It is so good to be here. I love this show. I love always getting to connect with you. I think those of us that do this do it because we really love like nerding out on productivity. So I'm excited for this conversation. And then just to kind of share sort of that same little bio that you shared. Yeah, just so they know who they're listening to. I help working professionals who have ADHD complete tasks that they've put off for months without getting overwhelmed and without relying on willpower and discipline. And, for me, it was really from my own struggles of ending up broke, divorced, and earning minimum wage, 9 years ago, and growing out of that, building a Fortune 500 career. And then within that, getting promoted to senior manager, starting a side hustle, which became my main hustle, 6-figure coaching business with, 100,000 plus followers. So that's just, my story in brief. And let's nerd out on some of this stuff.
Awesome. I'm going to jump in. You use some of the words I hear from my clients all the time, and words like self-discipline and willpower. All right. We don't want you to need that. That's my approach anyway. What are the things that when I hear those words as a woman with ADHD myself, and having been where so many of my clients are when they come to me for help, that like makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because I know what that does to us internally when we feel like we're lacking in something like willpower or self-discipline. Those are like characters. They're like moral characters. Self-discipline, willpower, work ethic, all of that. Those are like, moral characteristics. And for us, it's never about like the moral characteristics. That's never about who we are deep down. We have the best of intentions. We want to do the things that we say we're going to do, sometimes even want to do the things that we've committed to other people and to ourselves, but we still fall short. And that's kind of the crux of what we want to fix. So tell me a little bit about what kinds of things you would want to jump in and help clients with, or what the things are that you hear, maybe that get the hair up on the back of your neck.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely the willpower and discipline part do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that space, right? And I think you and I, we have very similar philosophies to how we like to approach stuff, which is why it's fun to talk shop with you, right? But
right.
A lot of the messages that we're surrounded with in sort of our neurotypical society, our hustle culture, and no one can outwork me, and
Right.
and it's just like, yeah, like we can't compete on those levels. So I had to realize, I was in the Fortune 500 world, and I was like, man, these people all can outwork me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm like a little bit like a delicate flower. Like I get a few hours in, and then like I start to wilt, and I can push through and like respond to some emails or like push through on a deadline. But I was like, I'm never gonna win a race that's about who can work harder.
Yeah.
And who has more grit and discipline and willpower. So it really just came down to, well, if I'm not going to win that race, then I'm going to have to win through strategy and cleverness, which a lot of us had developed because we had to navigate the school system. We had to navigate relationships. We had to navigate the working world around this, challenge of ours. Sometimes, often without telling other people that we were navigating around it, and many times not even knowing ourselves that we were navigating around it.
Exactly. And why? Absolutely. I love that. When I hear people wearing like the amount of time they work or, the hours they put in like a badge of honor, like that, I just like that baffles me. Like that's not the point of the work that we do. I don't want my clients to work more and work harder. I mean, what we're doing is hard enough, right? But it's more about efficiency and effectiveness and about, I always talk about like resource management. You are a resource. Your time, your energy, your focus, those are resources and they are very limited, right? So we want to make the most of them and allocate them where we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. So whoever's listening to this, if you're feeling like you need to work harder, I think you're missing out. First of all, that's where your whole life gets subsumed by whatever it is that you're working on. And that's not a happy or fulfilling place to be.
Yeah. And I'll share with you, Lynne, I'll share with you a little bit of my approach. Because I think you and I do similar things, but it's always fun to compare notes. So I think so. Let me share with you what I do to reduce overwhelm, what I do to reduce willpower. So reducing overwhelm. So one of the things, right? Like you get out the Stephen Coveys and the Tony Robbins and the Brendan Burchards and the David Allen, Getting Things Done, and all these different productivity books. And what happens is that we look at our day and the thing is basically this idea of like, how do I get more in? And the problem is that we're already overwhelmed without getting more in, right? So
right.
Getting more in isn't going to solve the overwhelm problem. And so one of my favorite things to do is to always just look at how can I eliminate things that are unimportant from the process and still get the majority of the result. And so when we look at all the things we need to do, what I found, so I talk about this idea that there are 3 types of tasks. There are fire alarm tasks, right? Someone's on you, there's a deadline. There's busy tasks, like, oh, I'm just going to go check email. And then there are tough tasks. And those are the things that, frankly, that we've been putting off, that we don't feel like doing, right? And of those 3 types of tasks, right? So we struggle the most with tough tasks. And what happens is we sit down to do the tough tasks and we put it off by doing busy work, right? I'm going to go check email because I don't want to update my resume. That's hard. Or we wait until the deadline and it becomes a fire alarm task.
Absolutely.
That we need to screw up our sleep and our eating and our health and all that and just stress ourselves out like crazy. And then we get, our resume updated because there was a deadline to submit or something, right? And so most people look at trying to improve all those tasks. I'm going to I'm going to manage all my busy work. I'm going to figure out when I'm going to cook and clean, and I'm going to manage my entire schedule. And I'm going to, plan out my 8 areas on the wheel of life and do all these elaborate things. And then we just end up like
in 15-minute increments.
Yeah, exactly. And then we just look at our plan and our plan is completely overwhelming.
Yeah. And we say, oh, hell no. Right.
Like I just heard from someone the other day that they're like, my goal for February is to look at my elaborate vision board for 2023 that I just got overwhelmed filling out because I only finished 20% of it because I'm doing every area of my life with pictures. And it's by the time you finish your vision board for 2023, it'll be December 2023. And you're completely overwhelmed, even just with the thought of completing the vision board. So my favorite thing is to say, okay, if we could only focus on a very small bit. And so my thing is this idea of that we just have to focus on 8%. So out of a 24-hour day, 8% of our hours is 2 hours. So if we just focus on that, and the idea is, okay, well, what's the biggest bang for our buck? And what I found is that if we just improve our muscle, our ability to do tough tasks, then everything else falls into place, because we sit down to work on our resume and then we just don't avoid it with busy work. And we don't wait till the deadline. So we all of a sudden we get a lot more done without a lot of the stress and the wasted time. And
absolutely,
it's a lot less overwhelming to plan to do a certain amount of tough tasks, or I just have people do a certain amount of minutes of tough tasks every day. And that's a lot less overwhelming than I'm going to plan out my entire schedule. I'm going to have a to-do list with 30 things and try to be efficient and click off as many things as possible. So that's sort of one distinction that's really helped me reduce overwhelm for myself and my clients.
Absolutely. We create our own overwhelm by trying to do things in a perfect way, make that perfect plan, overschedule, overplan. The way I teach time blocking, if you've ever been on one of my webinars or in one of my programs, is very different than the way a lot of productivity experts talk about time blocking. Is basically scheduling your day in a 15-minute increments. And you look at that, and if it doesn't overwhelm you right out of the gate and send you running to your inbox or something else that's easier in the moment, the odds of you executing it, I'm using my quotey fingers that you can't see perfectly, are not good. So then we go right back into that all or nothing perfectionistic thinking loop that makes it hard for us to do stuff to begin with, and we'll never feel good about what we are able to do, and we'll never see what works for us. That's the thing that I think a lot of my clients need to learn to do is pay attention to what's easy and why it's easy. What about how you're thinking about it or how you're approaching it made it easier this time, or made you able to do it so that you can replicate that and apply it to other areas where you're struggling? Because we can even turn the busy work into, we can convince ourselves that what did you call them? Fire alarm tasks. So we can convince ourselves that the busy work is a fire alarm task too, if there's something that we're avoiding sufficiently. I always call those things like yucky or, whatever. It's rarely the stuff that is like hard from a skills or intellect perspective that we struggle with, right? So I often say, and I'm sure other people say this, is, the stuff that we struggle with is rarely rocket science. If it were rocket science, it wouldn't be a problem, because it would be stimulating and interesting and challenging in a way that makes us tune in and get focused and be inspired. So paying attention to what are the things that you get the most stuck on, the things that tend to overwhelm you, and really learning about you and starting to untangle some of that, because almost all of that has as much to do with the way you're thinking about things, the way you're looking at things. I always call that the between the ears piece, as anything else. It's much less about the system or the tool. That's important too, right? You need a plan, but what that plan looks like is going to be important in different ways for different people. But if you don't untangle that whole, this is what works for me, this is what doesn't work for me, here's where I have trouble, we're going to keep having trouble in the places that we're having trouble.
Right. And I assume
that was a lot of words.
Yeah. I definitely followed like at least 50%. I promise I was paying attention.
To speak, Lynne, right?
I'm glad you don't use the video. I'm glad you don't use the video, because if people could see the video, I'm just like swinging back and forth on my my rolling chair.
I do the same. I'm doing the same thing. Coffee mug in my hand.
If my chair didn't swivel, I would seriously lose my mind. So I assume yes or no that you're a fan around habits.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so I think on the willpower piece, right, just so we make sure that we leave people with actionable stuff, right? So like,
right,
if we think about not using willpower,
right,
what's the best example of something that happens without willpower? Habits, right? And like, if someone's like, gee, I don't know, it's like, well, think about a bad habit you have.
Absolutely.
And then, do you need to use willpower to do the bad habit?
Right.
No, you don't, right?
Right.
Where do you use willpower? You use willpower to try not to do the bad habit.
Right.
And who usually wins, the willpower or the habit?
Every time.
Right. So
yes,
habits trump willpower, hands down. And yeah. And so, the idea around doing tough tasks and, or icky tasks, or however it is, in your language, the way you think about it. But the idea around doing tough tasks is, if I were to tell someone, okay, cool, now you're going to spend 2 hours, 3 hours a day doing things that you don't feel like doing, that you are putting off and want to avoid, that's going to trigger a ton of overwhelm, right? And so we need to build up our tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
I think of it as like a muscle.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Our ability to handle tough tasks.
Yes.
And
yeah,
the really cool part is a lot of what at least I learned growing up, or perceived in a lot of the self-help work and, going to Tony Robbins, is I just sort of need to like kind of pump myself up and think my way into like doing this stuff. And,
Right.
what I found with myself and with my clients is if we just are continually so I talked about this idea of tough task minutes. So every week, if we sort of raise the floor, so maybe we start at 5 minutes a day for the first week, and then we raise it to 10 minutes a day for the second week, or raise it to 15 minutes a day. We do these small increments of raising the amount. All of a sudden, it's just, oh yeah, sure, I do half an hour a day of stuff that I otherwise would have avoided, and you don't even know that you're doing it.
Right.
And that's the really cool part, because I have so little willpower and so little discipline. But from the outside, people look at me and they're like, you're so disciplined. And it's like, I'm not doing anything, but that's just the power of building a habit and, building a habit around something strategic. So in this case, just focusing on 8% of the stuff you need to do, not the other 92%. What are your thoughts on that, Lynne?
I think the whole notion of some of my clients hate the word habit because they've had such a hard time in their lives, or they perceive habits as being hard to create. Although, you spend 2 minutes with a client, you can help them uncover a whole bunch of habits or a whole bunch of routines or structure or whatever that they already have that they don't think of that way. So sometimes I'll talk about rhythms, right? But a lot of what you're talking about, I think, is finding that piece that you can do. Right. So if 5 minutes of hard stuff still feels overwhelming, or you're still kind of resisting that, I always tell my clients, pay attention to the resistance. Try 3, try 2, try 1. What's one thing you can do to start to chip away at that and move it forward? Sometimes it's that initial, open the document, give it a name, save it, open it again and look at it again. Sometimes we really have to step ourselves into things in smaller increments until we get used to doing those kinds of things and we build that muscle, as you said, so to speak. But the place that a lot of our clients will fall short with that, or will find themselves kind of hitting a roadblock with that, is that even though they're telling themselves, I only need to do 5 minutes, deep down, kind of that internal, deeper self-talk is, but 5 minutes doesn't really count, or 5 minutes doesn't really matter. So they're not giving themselves credit for the 5 minutes, which makes then it easier to do 7 minutes and then 10 minutes and then 50, so you've got to count it. You've got to start to pay attention to what your thinking is around those things. And I always say, put your inner cheerleader to work. If you've got the bad 70s or 80s movie sort of visual of the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, you've got these inner cheerleader, inner voices, right? We all do. And some of them are cheerleaders and some of them are just absolutely, stopping you in your tracks. So pay attention to when you need to consciously, give that inner cheerleader a little bit of shake and talk yourself into it. Wake her up, him up, talk yourself into it, tell yourself why you can do it, and then make sure you're giving yourself credit for it when you do. Because if you don't learn to count those things,
Totally,
you're not going to learn what works for you, and it's going to be harder for you to keep building that muscle.
Yeah.
It's half of this, maybe actually more like 90% of this, is a game that's played between the ears, right?
Yeah.
It really is. So anything else that you're thinking about? Anything else you want to share?
I mean, one sort of message that I constantly reiterate to everyone that I come in contact with, not just with clients, right, is this idea that productivity is a skill. Skills can be developed. We didn't get the benefit of being able to develop those skills growing up because the strategies that we were given didn't work.
Right.
We had the support, which is important. We had safe practice in the form of school. So those are the 3 variables for skill development. But as adults, now we might come up with new strategies, but we don't have the support and the safe practice. And we think we have to do it all on our own. So what I would just always tell people is that you're not broken, you're not defective, and it's not realistic to learn a complex skill like productivity as an adult on your own. It's not you wouldn't like neurotypicals didn't learn it on their own as kids growing up. They just had the strategy piece. We didn't have the strategy piece, even though we had the support and the safe practice. So you need all 3. You can't just as an adult be like, I've got strategy. I don't need support and safe practice. I'll just figure out this skill and suddenly be amazing
Yes.
at playing basketball by reading a book on it.
Right.
And I think that's mainly it.
And I think that's important for people to hear, right? You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. You just haven't learned to do things in ways that work for you. And if you were taught as a child to do things in a certain way that doesn't work for you in the way your brain processes information and organizes things naturally, then of course that didn't stick, right? Of course it didn't. I mean, I remember when my kids were growing up, how the teachers taught them to use planners. And I was like, yeah, this is not going to work for an ADHD kid to write in his planner 3 weeks from now that he has a paper due. Like, he's not going to look 3 weeks from now to see, right? So, you've got to learn how to do things in ways that work for you. And those are all things that you can learn. And I hope that, our listeners will take that away. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with your character. You just need to learn to do things differently. So I think that's an important message. So please, Aron, again, tell them how they can learn more about what you do and how they can get in touch with you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so if you want more information on this idea around just using 8% of your time, and this idea around how you can complete tasks that you've put off for months without getting overwhelmed and without relying on willpower, I actually have like a free 35-minute training. So if you go to freeadhdtraining.com, I've tried to get a URL that would be very difficult to remember, freeadhdtraining.com. You can watch that training there and get more details on the approach. And yeah, it's just been such a pleasure to see you, Lynne. I love chatting about this. I would love to catch up offline as well.
Awesome. Always good to have you. Always good to connect with you, Aron. I hope our listeners found this helpful. If you have questions, if you have suggestions, if you have thoughts, please feel free to join us in the ADHD Support Talk community on Facebook. Leave a review on iTunes if you find the podcast helpful, because the more 5-star reviews we have, the more people can find us and get the help that they need as well. So thank you again, Aron, for joining us. Thank you all for listening. And as always, I appreciate your attention. Bye until next time.